Hey everyone, Kaitlin here. Thanks for watching another episode of Baldwin Breakdowns, looking at big concepts, big ideas, and lots of big feelings. And this week, the concept or topic is dissociation, which I think is something really interesting. I'm going to talk about it kind of in two different realms. One part focusing on the, I guess, really like clinical and professional understanding of dissociation, and how it relates to mental health diagnoses and stuff like that. But then I also want to focus on how dissociation shows up in everyday lives of everyday people, not just this kind of very small percentage of people that would meet a diagnosis for a dissociative disorder, but also kind of in our everyday lives. How does dissociation show up and why does it show up? So, very generally, dissociation is kind of a disruption in consciousness, and more than that, it's a disruption in our ability to integrate all the information that we're typically processing moment to moment. So, in each moment, usually my body and my brain, and my nervous system is taking in and integrating the things that I see and hear around me. And it's also integrating any feelings that I have, any thoughts or physical sensations or memories that are coming up for me. We're usually constantly integrating these things. But when we're dissociated, that integration is again disrupted. There's kind of a block or some barrier that's getting in the way of that usual processing. Um, and so often this is kind of described as feeling like you are almost like out of your body. Or another way that I hear it kind of referenced frequently, or I always kind of pay attention to, is when people either look like or say that they are kind of spaced out or zoned out. Because usually it kind of follows this pattern where your physical body is here, it's in the room, like mine is right now, but maybe my kind of internal state is separated, so it just feels like I'm not quite here. And the reason why dissociation happens, is usually a result of trauma. And this is where I think there's some distinction between the kind of clinical and diagnostic understanding of it and how it actually shows up in our day-to-day lives. And I don't agree with everything about the medical model and the way that we diagnose around mental health, but there is a ton of evidence around how trauma will then later lead to dissociation or dissociative symptoms. Usually because this dissociation will happen as an attempt to protect us, where it's our body's defense essentially against whatever traumatic experience or experiences happen to us. So maybe it's some way of like locking certain memories away and preventing us from remembering them, or it's shielding us and kind of blocking the intensity of emotions that we might feel. And why I say usually and bring up this distinction between the clinical and kind of everyday understanding is that in the literature there's a lot of talk about kind of traditionally understood traumas, things like war or sexual or physical assault, or like intense accidents, like car crashes or plane crashes. But there are also, I guess, less obvious occurrences of trauma, like when you have a neglectful parent, when you have, issues in attachment, when you're younger, when you have issues in attachment when you're older and in your relationships as an adult. There are a lot of things that can create this impulse to dissociate. So just to quickly look at what dissociation looks like in a clinical and diagnostic context, there are three diagnoses that fall within this category. So the first one being depersonalization or derealization. This is when you kind of feel like you're not yourself, or you feel like you're not really part of your reality. And so, people in this state may say like, yeah, it kind of feels like I'm watching a movie of my life, but I'm not really there. or I don't feel like myself, or I'm out of my body. Dissociative amnesia, the second one, is um, a set of dissociative symptoms where you kind of have these huge blackout periods or memory gaps. And again, thinking about dissociation as a form of protection, um, that may follow a traumatic event or events in order to protect you from having to remember and relive those memories or those experiences. And then there's finally dissociative identity disorder. And this used to be called multiple personality disorder, especially I think in the most recent version of the DSM. But this is when a, a person is kind of split into multiple selves. I guess most generally, it seems like there are kind of multiple people within one, and they can kind of fully take over at a single moment in time. But so in all of these, there's this disruption in consciousness again, where we're not fully present, um, we're not really present at all, and we're not integrating information the way that we usually would. So I know I brought up the diagnoses, and I think that's an important part of understanding dissociation. Um, and most of us will never reach that point. Those are kind of the very, very severe levels of dissociation that result in those diagnoses or meeting that level of criteria. Um, but dissociation does show up often in our day-to-day lives. And I think I've said this already, one of the most common versions is when people say like, I'm spaced out or I'm zoned out. They kind of look like they've glossed over. And I've mentioned a few others, but one last one I want to mention, even though I'm way over time, I don't know. Sorry. Thanks for watching this far if you have. um, you guys are great. But another way that this will commonly show up is something called like underactivation or hypoarousal. And so this is when, you are experiencing or maybe talking about something that you would expect a certain intensity of emotion, and what you're showing is significantly less than that. So a really clear example that comes to mind for me is, when if someone is telling me that a parent has passed away very recently, you would expect this typically to come with, with crying, with a certain level of sadness, with this very intense feeling of grief. And if this person is telling me that with, a really flat tone, they're really not showing any emotional expression, that's an indication that they have dissociated. And so again, it's their body trying to protect them from the intensity of what would be that sadness and that grief. And so instead of actually connecting with that, integrating all of those feelings and actually experiencing those feelings, the body and mind dissociates, and then you come out with this very flat, unemotional, unexpressive person, that's telling you this information. So that's dissociation. Longer than I expected to, but this is like the fourth time I've recorded it, so I'm not going to do it again. I appreciate you guys watching so far, and hopefully that was an informative, kind of more of a heavy one, but an informative video, and I'll see you guys next week on another Baldwin Breakdowns. Bye.